amigos, how are you today? Here we are still in quarantine, here in my living room, in my office. Aquí estoy en mi oficina. Café con Cristina, Cristina Luna. And I have two guests today, two wonderful guests. Tengo, well, let's do this in Spanish. So tengo dos personas maravillosas que nos van a hablar de los temas psicológicos. We're going to talk about the psychological issues and how yoga can help your life in these moments of confinement. So here we have Jen Bradley, an associate professor at Northampton Community College, right? You're a licensed psychology. Jen, can you tell us a little bit about you and what you do? Am I right so far?
You are right so far, yes. So I coordinate the applied psychology program at Northampton Community College. So I am teaching the next generation of people who will become our behavioral health clinicians.
Yeah. How many years have you been practicing? And have you ever been like as a teacher, and have you practiced with clients before or patients?
Yes, I was a clinician for over 20 years. So I've worked with a wide variety of people and situations. So I've worked with children and adults and families. That's what's given me the background to be able to teach my students now in behavioral health.
And what is the outcome? What do you see with the students nowadays that with this pandemic that we have? How do they embrace, or how do they behave study-wise with what the psychological part with this situation that we have nowadays?
Well, as far as academics go, I think most students adjusted incredibly well. So it was a very abrupt change, as it was for all of us. But I think everyone has really worked together. There's been this incredible sense of community and a desire to be kind and patient and considerate with each other. So my students did very, very well. Many of my students are working in different facilities that are still open during this crisis. So
like which ones?
They've had a lot of long hours. Most of the facilities that are open are group homes for individuals with special needs. Obviously those don't close, and the needs of those individuals are greater now than they ever were before. It's very challenging to work with people who have a lesser understanding of what's happening and still need to be kept safe. Yeah, so that's what my students are working with.
Well, that's an amazing job, because yes. And you're right, these people are really don't know what's happening. Like little kids don't understand fully what's happening, but it has changed their lives completely. Right. And together with Jen Bradley, psychologist, licensed psychologist and teacher, we have Chris Loebsack, that she's a yoga studio owner. Chris teaches internationally, right? And this pandemic has changed her life, and she has adjusted her activity, right, to the new times. And we're going to bring all of you to bring you in a place where you can be in a better situation after this interview with the help of these two professionals. Chris, tell us a little bit about you and how has this changed your life before going fully into what we're going to do today.
Oh, well, I mean, everybody's had to adapt, and it's not that it's changed my life, it's continually changing my life. I think the whole thing is that we have to adapt every day. Part of the yoga joke is always just about going with the flow, but this has been more like a tsunami that's hit everyone. You know, my business is very much about personal interaction, helping students and individuals go within and work on their personal practice. But also in the studio setting and any of the teaching settings, it's a place where a lot of people also get a lot of social interaction. And for many of my clients, especially my older clients, it's not just their exercise program or their mental health outlet. It is also a time that for many people who are more isolated would connect socially. So I'm definitely seeing impacts there. We do a lot of now online options. We're also doing a lot of these online options like we're doing right now in Zoom, but we also do a lot of Facebook Live, trying to get as much out there as we can. But it has impacted things like my whole European tour this year has been completely canceled. Every year I travel, as much as I run a home studio, I travel pretty extensively and work with communities all over the world. And this year, it's all going to be digital. That's a big turnabout in a medium that's usually pretty personal and one-on-one connection, to step it back that far, and to have this digital interface in between us.
I see. Now that we're all together, and now that we have, you have embraced these changes in a positive way, thanks to your practice, to your psychological, studies. Tell us, where are people right now, 2 months after this pandemic has hit the world? How has this changed people's lives in uncertain times?
I think across the board, people are struggling. And what I've noticed most recently is that people's views seem to be polarizing. From one side of the struggle to the other. So some people are very concerned and focused primarily on the economic impact on their lives and are growing impatient with the disruption. And other people are more focused on their safety and feeling a heightened vulnerability. I think there's some tensions between people because of those different views.
Yeah. And how do you live that through your practice, Chris? And what would be your recommendations about this? What is your input about this?
Well, it's difficult because everybody reacts differently when they're in a mode of fear or anxiety. We have our basic fight or flight response. And some people want to fight the system. I want to get back to normal. And other people want to run and pull the covers over their head and it's not happening. We're all somewhere on the edge of those spectrums. And I think what's important is when we have tools, and at least from my perspective, I can't necessarily change people's individual ideologies, but I hope that we can provide tools for people to be able to step back, take a deep breath, see what's important, not just for their own mental, physical, financial, emotional safety, but for the overall, to sort of step back to the macrocosm, see the big picture, while at the same time tuning in to what you need at your own microcosm level. And that's a delicate dance to see. And I think we can all agree, our opinions change almost daily. Like as a business owner, I swing to one side sometimes, and as an individual health practitioner, I'm way on the other end. So I'm like a little ping pong in my own brain. And the key is to just keep breathing and saying what's important in this moment that serves me individually, while also feeding the big picture that serves the masses. And I think that's a really hard look for a lot of people. And I just hope we can keep providing tools to help them navigate these really crazy times.
Yeah, I see. Jen, do you have anything to say about this?
I think that really sums it up, that it is very common for people to have both views, and that the key is to recognize that both perspectives are valid. And just like Chris is saying, it is quite possible that people can feel both things at the same time, and that everything we're feeling really is understandable given the stress that we're under.
And how can we be more understanding? Because I realize that people are, these dates, the opening dates keep changing continually. So
Right.
People really don't have trust in the government anymore. The uncertainty that had a final date is indefinite. So nobody knows when anything will change or will happen. How are people coping with this? And what can you tell people about it? People are, as you say, are rebelling. Some say, I saw the other day that somebody went to a market or a supermarket without their mask, and officers took them over. Some people are very judgmental. Other people are showing their meanest side. What can you say about this, and what it shows about human beings when we are at the edge, and what can we do about it?
I think we can sum that up as, just normal human struggles managing anxiety. We all want predictability. We all want certainty. We want our routines to be what they've always been. Change is hard, and this was a change that was thrust upon us, and that it can be very hard to wrap your head around. And I think the key is very much keeping perspective, that this isn't going to be a forever situation. We are going to have to make some adaptations as a culture, and individually modify what we're doing. But many parts of our lives are still just the same as they've always been, and it's important to hold on to the things that you have, appreciate what you have, recognize how many good things are still just a part of your life like they've always been, and work together cooperatively with others to get through this.
Yeah, I agree that a gratitude practice, for me at least, has been essential. And I think it's also important for us to recognize that, when somebody falls on the side of judgment or meanness, most of that stuff comes from a place of fear. And when people are more uncertain, they either gravitate towards blame or judgment. There's all these things that people will sometimes the lesser side of our human nature can present itself. And so if we find somebody in that perspective, rather than feeding that monster by going back at it, I think it's a real opportunity for us to just say, hey, I hear you. This just doesn't feel right. And we're all in this together. And for me, if there's ever a time in our humanity to step back and really see that however different we think we are, or what side we think we land on, like you said, we can be all and both at the same time, because this is such an emotional time. And there's that recognition of our human vulnerability that can actually make us more compassionate towards one another. And it takes, I think we have the opportunity to cultivate a sense of awareness and treat each other with a little more respect. And that also means that when somebody maybe is sharp with you or has a sharper opinion, we don't have to be sharp back. We don't have to, just give the opposite opinion, but maybe more of an invitation to say, I hear you and I hold you in the space of love. Because really, people are feeling isolated, they're feeling scared, and everything that we can do to help one another know that they're cared for. When people feel safe, they are kinder. When people's needs are met, they're less anxious. So we want to be able to, as individuals, take responsibility for how we show up in the world, and then try and seek the tools that allow us to keep showing up in that way.
Well, we're going to talk about the tools in a little bit, because we need some tools about it. What kind of groups do you think, or people do you have any patterns of people that are suffering more with this pandemic, this confinement situation, from your experience with your clients, with the people around you?
Well, I definitely think this is affecting people of all ages, but obviously people of different ages are affected in different ways.
What are
so
the
for
patterns?
Example, young people are having a hard time understanding the need to physically distance because the virus doesn't typically cause them symptoms. And it's just a stage of life where people are more focused on their own needs, which is developmentally appropriate, but it makes it hard to be as selfless as we need to be to protect others right now. So that's a struggle for young people. I think families across the board are struggling with competing needs. For example, parents trying to parent their children at the same time they're trying to work in the same space, and everyone needing some alone time and trying to juggle that in a limited space when everyone is together. People who are living alone are struggling with a sense of isolation that's very difficult to adequately address. And I think older people in particular are feeling very vulnerable and can be quite isolated right now. A lot of the services that are available to our most fragile older people are not as active or available as they were pre-COVID-19. So they are cut off from a lot of sources of support.
Chris?
Yeah. Additionally, I would say that, we're a very service-based industry here where we live in the Pocono Mountains. And there's so many people I know who have lost their jobs. And when people have an economic uncertainty, that creates an extra level of fear. So isolation is one part of the equation, the need for that basic human social interaction. But then you level that on with people who now may feel isolated, who are also wondering, are they going to have enough to eat? Are they going to be able to pay rent? Are they going to get out of this and not be homeless? That's a level of fear and anxiety that, is really palpable. It's, in hippie speak, they would say it's so root chakra. It's your base needs, but it's your tribal instincts. These are the, they always show that, below, above a certain amount of money, you're not any happier. Below a certain amount of money, you're always in a state of conflict because you don't know if the basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter are going to be met. And now add that on with the potential for major illness and not knowing whether or not you could even have the medical care in your economic status. It creates another level of fear. So this is a multifaceted problem outside of just a realm of some basic human stress, which we all have. This is a really layered on situation that has many different factors that need to come in play to make it, to bring people up to that state where they feel safe enough to anchor into what's necessary for them.
So that's a good question, a good point that you're bringing. Safe enough. How can we feel safe enough? How can we cope with this situation, with our different levels of anxiety and situations, like being parents at home or feeling completely alone and isolated because we live on our own and we feel that we're afraid of going out and getting food because we don't want to get infected. So then we starve, or, some people get sick because of that, not going to a doctor when you need to go because you're afraid of being infected. All these are the kids with the uncertainty of the teenagers, that everything is about them and, this has nothing to do with them. How, with all your different experiences as professionals, Chris as a yoga teacher, Jen as a licensed psychology professor at Northampton Community College, how can we deal with this step by step? Because it's like, I'm listening to this and some people will think, well, okay, I understand, that makes sense, but how do I do this? Let's get in a practical mode, step by step. Jen first.
Okay. Well, I think it comes down to good self-care and using your best coping skills. One of the first things I would recommend to people is to keep your routines as consistent as possible. So as much elements of normalcy that you can maintain in your life, you should. Even simple things like, you make your bed in the morning, you have your meals at a set time. Whatever your routine was, it's important to maintain that. That gives us a rhythm and a continuity to our lives that helps set the foundation for everything else you can do.
And how can you do that with the kids? Because it's hard with kids, especially with little kids. I have a little one. I know it's like, their school they're not in school overnight. Right? Mm-hmm. You try to get a routine. They only want to watch TV or want to play, or if they're teenagers, they want to sleep until noon or afternoon. How do you do that with kids?
I think you include them in developing the plan for that routine. So it can be different, since the kids are home from school now, but you can still have a nice schedule and flow to your day that meets some of their wishes as well as works for mom and dad too. Having good self-care for the entire family is really important. So eating well, getting adequate sleep, exercising in the way that works for you is really important. And for families, that can be as simple as just as taking a walk together, just being outside in the yard if you have a yard. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate, but taking that time and prioritizing staying healthy in all the ways we can control is really important.
And also, I guess that look for help, because every community there's help, there are pantries, there are people that are looking for ways to help. We're not alone in this. So I
Right.
would say that when people feel alone on their own, we can tell them, hey, look for help. Ask somebody if you don't know where to look. There's always
Yes.
a place, there's always a plate, there are always pantries, right? There's always
Yes.
spiritual help.
Yes,
That makes
and we have resources both in terms of friends and family, our informal social network, and we also have resources in terms of a professional social network. So there are professional helpers, and there are people in your personal lives that all can be a tremendous support system for you and a source of great ideas. So you have that social connection, even if you don't have the physical proximity.
Yeah. What about you, Chris, from a yogi point of view?
It's actually very similar. And I think speaking to the idea of routine, you know, self-care can kind of feel like a flaky concept sometimes. And, you know, often people think of self-care as like getting a massage or going to the spa, but self-care can be as basic as I'm getting up at the same time every day and making sure I brush my teeth. It's, you know,
as simple as that.
It's as simple as that. I mean, when we start to get a little in a funk, often it's our personal care that starts to go. You know, did you take a shower every day? You know, not that life is going to die if you skipped a shower last Tuesday. But there, you know, a lot. It's easy to get complacent as the days roll on and the things become sort of one day rolling into another. So I think, like you said, getting up, making your bed, you know, making sure you're doing the basic needs of self-care. But then beyond that, I think, you know, of course, it's one of the things we've done at the studio. We first we were just going to put out random videos so that people could do them anytime, and they are available for students at any time post live. But one of the things we found was there were students who were so craving that idea of staying with routine that we go live every day at specific times. So people are like, that's how I know what day it is. What
Boundless
class?
Yoga, right? BoundlessYoga.com.
Yeah, so it helps people stay accountable to something when they have to show up for something. So I'm not saying it has to be a yoga class just because I do yoga, but whatever it is for you, if you can create those little things for yourself that like, I have to show up for something. And it could be a Zoom appointment with a friend. It could be a phone call at a specific time with a parent. I think it's, you know, in order to not feel isolated, we are in an amazing time. Like centuries ago when these big plagues hit, nobody had Zoom. They couldn't do what we're doing now. How awesome is this? That we're all sitting in the safety of our own space, and I can still look at you, Christina, and say, I love you, and so nice to meet you, Miss Jen. Like, this is a pretty amazing space that we have all of this digital support in an incredible time to reach out, not only to ask for help when we need it. And I know that word vulnerability scares bejesus out of people sometimes, but, you know, there's power in our vulnerability to say, you know, to ask for what you need. But for the people who are shy about that, can we pick up the phone and just check in on somebody and say, how are you doing, friend? I haven't heard from you in a while. Are you okay? Those little things that we can do for one another strengthen our social connections and show us that we might be a little bit distant, but we are far from isolated, and we have tremendous power with the connections we have in our intimate social support, but our broader social support because of the power of these kind of mediums. So beyond the idea of yoga as exercise, yoga is really union, or, you know, a balanced connection. They would say that yoga, the idea of yoga is actually to still the patterns of your mind, to calm the crazy that we do to ourselves as humans. And we do that through multiple ways, through exercising regularly, through our healthy diet, but also for, you know, how we outreach to one another. There's, you know, you're not alone in this. Even if you're, you know, a little bit isolated, there's still a way to connect. And I would encourage people to connect as much as possible, especially if you're feeling sad. If you want to isolate because you feel like you just need some alone time, great. But not because you feel you have no other option. There are so many ways that you can reach out, and we can reach out to one another to really take care of one another.
Hey, Chris, I wanted to bring you in because when I talked to Jen initially, she was talking about how to cope in different ways with anxiety. And she mentioned meditation and yoga. So I thought this is a wonderful way of bringing both of you together and see how can we handle this. Because now, Jen, from your professional point of view, how can meditation, yoga, other techniques help people? Because somebody's thinking, okay, I listen, but I still feel anxious. I don't know when there is an end date. I don't know if I will ever work again. I don't know how I will pay my rent, when I will, when my life will go back to normal, or if there will be a new normal. What can I do about it? You talk, it makes sense, but I'm stuck.
Okay. So meditation and yoga are two examples of activities that get us in flow, that give us a chance to mentally take a break from all of our external worries and give ourselves a chance to let our minds calm down, to feel soothed, and to have that opportunity to mentally rest and regenerate. So both of those are excellent exercises. Other people have hobbies that will do the same thing for them. So for example, some people like to do art or crafts. Other people work on mechanical equipment. So the particular form isn't necessarily what's important. It's just about finding that activity that works for you. And I mentioned meditation and yoga because I know the structure of those activities tends to be effective for a significant percentage of people.
I see. Yeah. And what do we do with, yes, Chris, you're going to say?
Well, I was going to say, just to clarify, I think a lot of people kind of get confused about yoga and meditation.
And exercise. And
well, some sort of as esoteric concepts in general. So yoga is kind of like the umbrella term for a system of mental, it's actually mental emotional health. The idea, yoga itself means union. In the kind of the book that they use on yoga philosophy, the Yoga Sutras, the second line says, why do we do yoga? We do yoga to still the patterns of consciousness, to calm the mind. Meditation is the vehicle for that. And meditation simply means that you're drawing upon a one-pointed focus, so that you're kind of clearing out all the stories. You come in, you focus on just one thing. It could be as simple as the breath. It could be, I'm just going to look at this flower and kind of appreciate this beautiful flower. It could be knitting. Like, there's so many different ways to have a meditative experience that could be doing or the state of breathing and just taking some calm. Asana is the word that's used for postures. So I think sometimes people think that yoga is simply a physical practice. But yoga is really the system that embraces the physical and the mental practices in holistic living. An asana practice would be doing postures, and that can be very simple and easy, or that can look a lot like gymnastics. So yoga can be, like any other exercise program, could be helpful or harmful depending on how you apply it. So I would check in if you've never taken before. I would definitely start at the beginning with beginners classes. Don't just jump into any old thing that might not serve you or might intimidate you. I would look at something that's approachable, manageable, and or email your local yoga teachers.
Or Chris, can you put it in your chat?
Wherever you are, because I'm hoping that people see this, that won't just be about our local community, but whomever you have that you can speak to. And of course, you can always email us at the studio if you have questions about yoga in general.
Can you give us your email, please? Can you type it down?
info@boundlessyogastudio.com.
I can do that while you're talking.
And the idea is that you can get paired with a class that's right for you. But really the idea of yoga is really drawing in everything to being in a state of awareness no matter what you're doing. So you could be mowing the lawn and be practicing yoga if you're doing it in a way that you're focused, you're breathing, you're just allowing yourself to be fully present, to, as they would say, in the now. But what that means is you're not worrying about what's going to happen next. You're not going to pay attention to what happened 3 weeks ago. You're focused on one moment, one task, that idea of being present. And really, I think that's one of the greatest tools, because most anxiety is either thinking about what yesterday, or thinking about what may or may not happen tomorrow. And when we can really get a little more present and more grounded, we can take the next steps as they come with a little more grace and ease. It doesn't mean we don't have the normal up and down waves that come through our emotional being. Sometimes people, I get the impression that people think, oh, well, if I practice yoga, I won't have any reactions. I won't have this. I'll be perfectly calm. No, I can tell you, after 30 years of practice, you're still a little bit of a nutcase. We all are. We're human beings, right? It's part of our human condition is to have emotional responses. But the thing that happens is you then have tools to deal with those emotional responses. So you feel something, but you choose how you react to it. You don't jump on the wave and let it carry you. Instead, you choose which wave you're going to ride.
You mean that the practice itself, the postures, the asanas, can also help you refocus your mind and have a clear thought and diminish anxiety?
Yeah, because part of what you do when you're in the posture is you notice your reaction to the pose. Is this pose starting to get challenging? How do I want to respond to that? Do I want to exit this pose immediately? Do I want to stay with it and just, allow myself to be in a state of mild discomfort while I'm getting stronger or getting more flexible? Can I also choose, does this pose feel safe? If it's not right, if I have an injury, can I allow myself to exit when I'm supposed to exit? And that might be before somebody else does. So we learn how to navigate our own emotional response without having to try and be like anybody else in the room. And in that way, you're on your mat being your own awesome self. Jen can be on her mat being her awesome self. Christina, you're on your mat being your own awesome self. And we're all doing, a similar thing together, but we're doing it in a way that feels safe and appropriate for us. And to me, that's really how we should be operating as human beings. That you're all each awesome. You're all having your own thought process. You can have a different opinion. You can have all this stuff going on. But at the end of the day, if we focus more on how we're operating within ourselves and we learn to navigate that response, we're also going to be less judgmental about whether somebody else makes a different choice. And that, we can navigate this together while we all navigate our own individual emotional responses from the get-go.
Yeah. You know what, Chris, I wanted to tell you that I'm going to share something very personal. My brother is in Spain living alone on his own and in this little apartment at my mom's house. And, on his own for 2.5 months, he couldn't get out. They just let them go out. And he's a depressive person a little bit. So he was telling me that how this confinement is really affecting people that are living alone, especially, and they cannot go out and they don't have any very limited ways to communicate with other people. And then I told him to do yoga and he was like, yeah, but I cannot do this. I cannot reach my toes. I cannot. And I remember something that Brian, your husband, that also the teacher said, and he was saying, this is your own experience, your own practice. I said, you don't have to do the acrobats that the teacher is doing, right? Or bend as far. It's about movement, a little bit of movement, keeping you moving, keeping you flexible. And one day you will realize that you're not only touching your thighs, you're touching your knees. And maybe one day you'll say, wow, now I'm touching my toes. I didn't even realize that. So it's like, you don't have to look at people around. It's your own experience and what you gain from it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the biggest excuses I get. Oh, I can't do yoga. I have tight hamstrings. Well, first of all, I don't know why you think hamstrings are the only muscle in your body that you can't do yoga over. But all of us have tight hamstrings. It's part of the human condition. Like bodies get used, they get tight. But it really is about just doing what you can do. Yoga is so, I call it, it's like truly designer. You make it fit you. You don't have to fit the practice. And it's very unfortunate to me that often what we see in the imagery of yoga is, 20-something-year-old blonde and super skinny. But that's not what shows up in yoga. Yoga is for everybody. I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was BKS Iyengar, one of the modern fathers of yoga, so to speak. He was really responsible for teaching a lot of people alignment in practices. But he would say, the infirmed can do yoga. The young can do yoga. The old can do yoga. You know who can't do yoga? Lazy people. Lazy people can't do yoga. You have to show up, with yourself. And so it was really about, you know, of course we laugh, but that's really the heart of it is, you know, if I can't move my hand and I can only move it here to here, if that's all I get, it's still movement. Maybe at some point it goes to here or all the way to here, but you don't start here and go immediately to here on day one. You wouldn't say, I've never played the piano before. I'm 40 years old. I think I'm going to pull out a Beethoven piece and play it. No, you'd take a piano lesson and you'd learn where middle C is, and then you'd learn some scales, and then you'd learn some chords, and eventually you might work your way up to, you know, some sort of symphonic piece, you know. The same with any other thing, but I don't know why when it comes to yoga, people often will say, well, if I can't do the biggest expression, I shouldn't do any of it. Actually, in fact, I think it's not just yoga. I think it's a lot of things culturally, especially I find it more so with Americans, I hate to say, than a lot of the places I teach in Europe. Americans are, you know, we have this idea sometimes that if we're not perfect at it, we shouldn't try. Well, how do you get perfect at it if you don't try anything? Like, if we can release this insane idea of perfection and start coming into the idea of exploration, a benevolent curiosity about who we are, how we work, what we can explore, we have such an amazing journey of what we can taste and feel and see in our own worlds. So the idea that we can't do it because we're not there yet kind of defeats the purpose of the journey. And I would really just invite people to say, like, when did you lose your taste for experience? You know, come just explore, you know, the idea of being, you know, awesome with yourself. You know, you're the best friend you have, and you should hang out with you more often.
That's a great idea. Jen, now about when there's a time when you say we cannot help ourselves and we need to seek help outside, and where can we find that?
That's a great question.
For both of you, but you know, like, you're the psychologist here, so let's start with you.
Okay.
Everything is valid.
I would say that there isn't a specific set point across the board, but I think if a person is feeling like they are having symptoms of anxiety or depression, and I'll explain what those are in a moment, that they feel like they have tried what they are capable of doing and aren't getting the relief that they need, or they just feel like they need additional support, that's the time to seek professional help. So symptoms of anxiety that people should look for are if you're having difficulty sleeping, if you're having difficulty concentrating throughout the day, if you're feeling overwhelmed often, or you're worrying excessively. Those are the symptoms that I would say indicate that your anxiety level is pretty high and you could benefit from a professional helper. As far as depressive symptoms, you'll notice a change in mood. Most people will experience bouts of sadness, but some people also experience a good deal of irritability along with sadness. In general, there would be a change of energy level. Most people feel very fatigued and may feel physical discomfort in their bodies and have low motivation. That's all related to brain changes that affect energy level. Changes in sleep patterns and appetite. That can be more sleeping or less, hungrier or less hungry. It can go either direction. And feeling hopeless is a big symptom of depression that's important to look for. Hopelessness in particular is one where if you're experiencing that, that's a sign that you can really benefit from having someone to talk to who can help guide you through that. So those would be a summary of what to look for.
So in these cases, people should look for help, external help, you mean? What kind of help?
And so a therapist, and therapists have done a wonderful job of responding very quickly in this crisis. So you can now get phone or video sessions with your therapist. You don't need to see the person in person, and your insurance does cover that. So that's a really great thing too. And I wanted to mention one other thing, which I think is a really amazing service that's being provided right now. There's a national disaster distress helpline that you can call anytime. And I want to give you that number.
Yeah, let me put it now. National in the chat.
Okay, just disaster distress helpline. And the number is 1-800-985-5990.
Okay. So what kind of help do they provide?
So this is a helpline that's available 24/7, and it's basically a way to receive a support service if you're having difficulty coping with whatever your particular situation is related to COVID-19. The service is multilingual, and they can also refer you to a local mental health professional so they can connect you with additional services. The helpline is free. And you can also text if you don't want to call. So you can text, and it's all one word, talk with us, and you text that to 66746. And you can then text with a counselor.
Well, that's great information. Thank you so much, because we need it.
Sure thing.
Counselor. And now lastly, because this was going to be an interview, but we have more a chat between, people that we are joining our energies, our know-how, how to help others. So tell me how can we turn things around and make lemons from lemons, right? Lemonade from lemons, you say that in English?
Yes.
And how have you turned that around in your lives?
Well, I would say, one of the things is to first recognize where you are. When Jen was talking about the idea of recognizing that you're in stress, the difference between stress, anxiety, and depression. A couple of things come into play, and she can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but severity and longevity. So you can have a day that you feel anxious, and maybe that means you just need to stop what you're doing and go take a class. But if your anxious feelings start going a week, 2 weeks, and you haven't been able to use other tools you have, then yes, make those calls, get that help. The downside is sometimes when people are depressed, it's almost a feedback loop that's hard to actually see where they are. So as much as we're asking you to take care of yourself, and if you notice yourself feeling those things, it's so important to understand what the symptoms are so you can recognize it within yourself and seek the help. But if you also see someone else who is starting to have those symptoms, having that conversation with them so that they can maybe start to have the awareness that finding the help they need. So it's both, internal, taking care of what we need, but also checking in with those around us to make sure that nobody's slipping in. And it can happen to anybody, even when you have tools. I'll be very honest, like when this first happened, here, my studio is thriving. We're on the best year we've ever had. Things are flowing. The clients are there. The community's rocking. And within 24 hours, all this stuff is happening. You see it in the news. Stuff's happening in China. Some things have hit Europe, but it hasn't hit home yet. Like that, this is coming. And within 24 hours, it's like boom, business shut. Everybody separated. You have 24 hours to rethink your entire business plan and how you're going to keep everything functioning, and you have no idea what's going to happen. And what happens to a lot of us is we go into crisis mode. At first, it's like, I'm going to do what I need to do. I'm going to get stuff done. And you start to get the plan going, but then there's a while where like your crisis mode is going and you might not realize that you're not taking care of other needs, that you haven't stopped and, really sat down and taken a few deep breaths for yourself. And I hit a point after about week 4 that we'd been closed where it suddenly hit me. I was like, something's not right. Like I'm doing all the things I need. I'm getting up. I'm going and doing these classes every day. I am, making dinner, healthy dinner every night for me and my husband. My house is spotless. And internally, I feel dead. And there was that scary recognition of, I am functionally depressed. I am doing everything, and because it's fine on the surface, everybody's like, oh, you got it together, you're feeling great. But as soon as you recognize that, it can be really scary then to say, will you help me? And the first thing I did was I turned to my husband. I was like, babe, I think I'm functionally depressed. And then I called 3 of my best friends and I was like, I think I'm functionally depressed. And we talked, and I turned to all the tools I had was to finally ask for help, ask for somebody to take over 1 or 2 of the Facebook Live classes, ask for, somebody to take care of this. My mom dropped food off on my back doorstep, so I had a couple days I didn't have to cook. Within a couple of days, I was able to like break the cycle and step back. And I had sadness then, but it kept me from going down this hamster wheel. And I think a lot of people think, like, especially when you're in the mode and you're a person who's caring for other people, it can be scarier for the caretakers to ask for the help they need. And the biggest thing I hear from women in particular is, I can't take care of myself. I can't take those 5 minutes to meditate, because I have to do this, this, and this. And if I do it for myself, I'm being selfish. That words is selfish cuts to the heart. That makes me, feel pain for other people's pain, because it's not selfish to take care of yourself. If you don't take care of you, if you don't reach for what's available to you, you're operating from an empty cup. And sooner or later, it's going to come to a tipping point. So I really, really implore you out there, if you're starting to feel that, it may not just mean that you have to, go to a counselor, but at the very least, look at the people you love and say, I'm not feeling so great today. It's okay to be honest and say, I'm having a lousy day. There's a pandemic going on. There's going to be a lot of lousy days for a lot of people. And it's okay to say that I feel that, and I recognize I still have things I have to do. But I think sometimes just even the acknowledgement of it can help us take that next step forward. Mm-hmm. So I think that not only is it okay to feel it, but that often the fear we have about outreach is far worse than the actual outreach. Once that, it's kind of like pulling a Band-Aid off, right? Once you ask for help, they're like, why didn't I ask for help sooner? So I hope you'll be brave enough, because I know it's scary. I'm a person that, I didn't start out all zen. I was like, I've got it all together. Never had it together. Yeah. And I think for a lot of us, it's we have to step back to something that's a little more intuitive and a little more space. And sometimes the only way you get to acknowledge those emotions is to take the space. If you don't have 5 minutes, it's the old saying, you should meditate 20 minutes a day. Unless, of course, you don't have time, then you should meditate for 2 hours. Because in reality, taking the break gives us enough perspective that we can actually create more time for ourselves. It feels so counterintuitive, but study after study will show you that the people who are actually the most productive and get the most done are the ones who actually take the most time for themselves. Wow. And you might not believe it until you actually give it a try, but I'm going to beg you, give it a try.
Even if it's a few minutes every day, like with yoga. Start it. Yeah. Jen, thank you so much. Chris, how are you feeling now?
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good. It was, I came out the other side of it, but I think, it's one of those things that it can happen to anybody. And, I had never had like a history of anything. It wasn't like I lived a very stressful life, or I've had it pretty good. I have a great resource network, a loving family. I know I am very privileged in many ways to have support systems where not everybody does. And even then, like, it sneaks up on you when you don't expect sometimes. And I think sometimes the more you think you have it together, when it does happen, you could be more fearful about stepping forward. I must admit there's a little trigger that felt a little scary about admitting that publicly. But I think it's important to share because I think there's far too many people who won't admit it until it becomes far too weighty on you.
Yeah. Thank you. Jen, what about you? How are you making the most lemonade of these lemons?
Well, what I'm trying to do is help others through it. And I think so much of what I've learned as a clinician has been really helpful to help me stay in perspective. And I guess that's what I would say to others is just that, we're in challenging times, and a challenge is both a threat and an opportunity. And the way to be to function as best you can right now is to really focus on those opportunities, identify them, and make the most of them. So, for example, if you're a parent of school-age kids now, I know it's really, really stressful. But on the other hand, you have this amazing opportunity to spend time with your kids in a way you probably never had before. And, you can take this time and think of it as a way to create memories for your children so they can look back on this time in their lives years from now and remember what a wonderful time they had with you. If you're unemployed, this is an opportunity to potentially reinvent yourself. Maybe going back to school, maybe looking into different career options, maybe just developing an aspect of yourself you didn't have time to do before. And taking those opportunities is what helps you get through the tough times so that we don't just focus on the threat, we keep life in balance.
Thank you so much. Jen Bradley, psychologist, licensed psychologist, professor of Northampton Community College. How many years have you been a professor now?
Over a decade.
Over a decade and over 20 years practicing, right? And Chris Lobsack,
yes,
yoga studio owner, over 30 years practicing yoga. And thank you for giving us an insight of how to cope with this situation with all your different expertise. And we hope that this is going to help people, and hopefully we will be able to have other interviews where we can, address different angles and different aspects. So people, amigos, if you have any questions, if you have anything that you want us to discuss, please do it. This is on our YouTube Café con Cristina, and we're doing this to help and unite people in these tough times. Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for being here with us. Is there anything else you want to see to finalize?
That's all, Christina. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Christina. Pleasure, and stay safe out there. Don't forget to wash your hands.
Don't forget to wash your hands. And if you want people,
wear your masks.
Wear your mask. And if you need meditation and yoga, Boundless Yoga Studio, right? In Facebook Live, give us daily classes. You can check in Boundless Yoga Studio, right? On Facebook, and you can find the information. Okay, and you have any questions, people can please go to me and I will address them to these amazing professional women. Thank you so much, amigos. Recuerden, suscríbanse if you want, subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to look at these interviews and other interviews with the president of the hospital in a weekly basis, and with the East Stroudsburg school board specialists also there, and other interviews that can help you in English and in Spanish. Thank you so much.